The airport loudspeaker echoed across the private aviation terminal just as security surrounded Marcus Reed, a step away from the aircraft. Every conversation nearby stopped instantly. Wealthy passengers turned their heads. Flight crew froze mid-conversation. Cameras from business reporters waiting near the runway slowly shifted toward the confrontation. Marcus stood still, one hand gripping the strap of his small carry-on bag, confusion flickering across his face. "I think there's been a mistake," he said calmly. The security officer didn't relax. "This area is restricted to authorized passengers only." Marcus glanced behind him at the sleek white Gulfstream jet parked outside the glass wall. Its engines hummed softly, ready for departure. His name was already displayed on the digital boarding screen beside the gate, yet 3 guards now blocked his path. A woman in an expensive suit whispered loudly nearby. "He probably walked in from the wrong terminal." Someone else chuckled. Marcus heard it. He always heard it. "I am an authorized passenger," he replied evenly. The officer extended his hand. "Boarding credentials." Marcus handed over his phone confirmation. The guard studied it for barely 2 seconds before shaking his head. "This doesn't look valid." Around them, tension thickened. Phones began recording discreetly. A young employee from the flight desk watched nervously but said nothing. Marco felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, not anger, recognition. This moment, again, different place, same assumption. "I assure you," Marcus said quietly, "I belong on that flight." The officer's voice hardened. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll escort you out." And just like that, the first 30 seconds turned a routine boarding into a public judgment. Marcus Reed had spent most of his life entering rooms where people decided who he was before introductions began. At 38, he was one of the most respected aerospace systems engineers in the United States. Though few outside elite aviation circles recognized his name, his work existed behind the scenes: safety systems, navigation optimization, emergency response automation used by major airlines worldwide, invisible success, the kind that rarely came with applause. Today's flight, however, was different. He had been invited to speak at the Global Aviation Innovation Summit in New York, a gathering attended by CEOs, government regulators, and investors shaping the future of flights. The invitation wasn't public yet. Organizers planned a surprise announcement during the opening ceremony. Marcus preferred it that way. Quiet arrivals were easier, or at least they usually were. Back at the terminal, the situation escalated quickly. A supervisor arrived, scanning Marcus with a skeptical expression. "What seems to be the issue?" "Unauthorized individual attempting to board," the guard replied. Marcus sighed softly. "I'm not unauthorized." The supervisor crossed her arms. "This is a private charter for Summit executives." "Yes," Marcus said calmly. "I know." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, unconvinced. "Well, sir, unless you can prove executive status, you'll need to leave." Behind them, passengers dressed in tailored suits walked freely onto the jet without being questioned. Marcus watched silently as each passed inspection without showing identification. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A young airport employee finally approached hesitantly. His name actually appears on the passenger list," she said quietly. The supervisor barely glanced at her. "We'll verify that later." Marcus felt eyes pressing into him from every direction. Whispers grew louder. "He's arguing. Why would he even try? Security should just remove him." The words weren't shouted, just loud enough. The supervisor turned back to Marcus. "Sir, final warning." Marcus inhaled slowly. Years earlier, moments like this filled him with frustration. Now they filled him with patience sharpened by experience. "Before you escort me out," he said gently, "perhaps you should call the flight coordinator." The supervisor hesitated, more annoyed than convinced, but signaled for a call anyway. While waiting, security remained positioned around him. The jet engines grew louder outside. Boarding neared completion. Then everything changed. A black sedan sped onto the tarmac. Airport staff straightened immediately. A man stepped out, David Langford, billionaire aviation investor and host of the summit. He walked briskly toward the terminal, scanning the area, then stopped abruptly when he saw Marcus surrounded by security. His expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Marcus," he said loudly. Every head turned. Langford approached quickly, extending his hand. "There you are. We've been waiting for you." Silence slammed into the terminal. Security officers exchanged uncertain glances. The supervisor blinked repeatedly. "You know him?" Langford laughed in disbelief. "Know him?" He designed half the safety architecture being presented at this summit. He turned to the stunned crowd. "This is Marcus Reed, the keynote speaker." The words rippled through the room like thunder. Phones lowered. Whispers stopped. Marcus remained calm, though the tension finally eased from his shoulders. The supervisor's face drained of color. We didn't realize, Marcus nodded gently. That's the point. No accusation, just truth. Langford frowned at the situation. Why isn't he boarding? No one answered immediately. The young employee finally spoke. They thought he wasn't authorized. Langford looked at the guards, then at Marcus, understanding dawning instantly. His voice hardened. He's the reason this aircraft meets next-generation safety certification. The weight of that statement settled heavily. Passengers watching nearby shifted uncomfortably. The same people who had whispered minutes earlier now avoided eye contact. Marcus picked up his bag calmly. I'd still like to make the flight, he said. Langford nodded quickly. Of course. Security stepped aside. But the moment didn't end there. Because embarrassment had already exposed something deeper than a simple misunderstanding. As Marcus walked toward Bordy, the supervisor quietly said, I'm sorry. Marcus paused. He looked around the terminal at the guards, the passengers, the employees pretending to work while listening closely. I don't need apologies, he said softly. Just consistency. He boarded the jet without another word. During the flight, Marcus stared out the window at clouds stretching endlessly beneath them. Langford sat across from him. I had no idea that happened, Langford said. That shouldn't have. It happens, Marcus replied calmly. Langford shook his head. Not anymore. Marcus gave a small smile. Change, he knew, rarely happened because of anger. It happened because moments became impossible to ignore. When the jet landed in New York, news of the incident had already begun spreading internally among summit organizers. By evening, executives gathered in a packed auditorium filled with media representatives. The host stepped onto the stage. Tonight's keynote speaker represents innovation not just in technology, she announced, but in perspective. A spotlight illuminated Marcus as he walked onto the stage. The same man who had nearly been escorted out hours earlier now stood before the most powerful leaders in aviation. He didn't begin with achievements. He began with a story. This morning, he said calmly, I almost didn't make this flight. The audience leaned forward. Marcus described the experience without anger, without naming individuals, only describing assumptions, hesitation, and how quickly belonging could be questioned. You can build the safest aircraft in the world, he said, but systems still fail when human judgment relies on appearance instead of information. The room fell silent. Executives shifted in their seats. Some looked uncomfortable, others thoughtful. Safety, Marcus continued, isn't only mechanical, it's cultural. Every decision begins with how we see each other. Applause began slowly, then grew louder, not because of drama, because of recognition. Weeks later, aviation companies introduced new bisource training tied directly to customer safety and professional evaluation. The incident became a case study not about blame, but improvement. Marcus returned to his quiet work, designing systems few passengers would ever think about. One evening, he received an email from the young airport employee who had defended him. She wrote that the experience changed how staff were trained at the terminal. Identification policies were rewritten. Employees were encouraged to verify before assuming. At the end of her message, she added, Thank you for staying calm. You made people listen. Marcus closed his laptop slowly. Outside his office window, planes crossed the evening sky. Hundreds of travelers heading toward destinations they trusted strangers to guide them safely. Toward most would never know his name. And that was fine, because respect, like safety, worked best when it became invisible, built quietly into systems until fairness felt normal. The dramatic moment at the terminal would fade from memory, but the lesson would remain. Not every powerful reveal required anger. Sometimes the strongest statement was simply standing still long enough for the truth to arrive on its own. The applause inside the auditorium lasted longer than Marcus expected. He stood still, under the stage lights, watching hundreds of aviation executives, engineers, journalists, and investors rise to their feet. The sound echoed through the massive hall, powerful and overwhelming, yet Marcus felt strangely calm. Just hours earlier, he had been standing in a private terminal surrounded by suspicion. Now, the same industry that almost excluded him listened carefully to every word he said. When the applause finally faded, Marcus stepped away from the podium. Several executives immediately approached him, shaking his hand, praising his speech, complimenting his composure. You handled that situation with incredible professionalism, one airline CEO said. Marcus nodded politely, but inside he reflected on something deeper. Professionalism was often expected from people who were forced to remain calm in uncomfortable situations. Losing composure would have confirmed assumptions. Staying calm forced people to confront their own behavior instead. As he exited backstage, Langford caught up with him again. You changed the room tonight, Langford said. People needed to hear that. Marcus smiled slightly. People usually know the truth already. they just don't experience it personally. Outside the convention center, reporters waited near black SUVs lined along the curb. News of the airport incident had quietly reached media outlets after several witnesses posted short clips online. Though the videos showed only fragments, they sparked conversations across professional networks. A reporter approached cautiously. "Mr. Reed, can you comment on what happened at the terminal this morning?" Marcus paused before answering. "It wasn't about one airport or one person," he said calmly. "It was about how quickly assumptions can override facts. My hope is that the conversation leads to improvement." The reporter nodded, surprised by the absence of anger. That response spread faster than the incident itself. Over the next few days, short clips of Marcus's keynote speech circulated online. Viewers shared the moment he said, "Belonging shouldn't require proof beyond presence." The quote appeared across professional forums and aviation discussion groups, sparking debates about bias in high-security environments. Back at the airport where everything began, internal meetings were already underway. The supervisor who had confronted Marcus sat quietly in a conference room alongside security leadership and corporate representatives. The video footage played, again not to embarrass anyone, but to analyze decision-making step by step. "What triggered escalation?" one trainer asked. The guards reviewed their actions carefully. They realized something uncomfortable. No policy had actually been violated. Identification had been available. Verification procedures existed. The problem wasn't rules, it was interpretation. Assumptions filled gaps where patience should have existed. The young employee who had spoken up during the incident described what she noticed: how Marcus remained calm, how his name appeared clearly on the list, how hesitation grew because no one wanted to challenge authority once a conclusion had already formed. Her observation became a turning point. Within weeks, the airport implemented a revised verification protocol requiring confirmation before confrontation. Staff were trained to pause escalation unless immediate safety risks existed. The change seemed small, but small procedural changes often prevented large human mistakes. Meanwhile, Marcus returned briefly to his engineering office in Denver. His workspace looked exactly as he had left it: stacks of technical diagrams, simulation monitors glowing softly, coffee cups forgotten beside notebooks filled with calculations. Here, no one questioned whether he belonged. Here, results mattered more than perception. Still, emails continued arriving from strangers who had watched his speech. Some thanked him. Others shared personal stories: pilots describing moments when colleagues were underestimated, engineers recalling times they felt invisible despite expertise. One message stood out. It came from a teenage student studying aerospace engineering. "I saw your talk online." The message read, "I didn't think people like me could work in aviation leadership until now." Marcus reread the message several times. He remembered being that age, fascinated by aircraft yet rarely seeing anyone who looked like him in leadership roles. Representation had never been about recognition. It was about possibility. A week later, Marcus received another unexpected invitation, this time from the Federal Aviation Standards Council. They wanted him to help develop human factor training programs addressing decision bias in safety environments. During the first meeting, regulators discussed accident prevention statistics, communication breakdowns, and automation risks. Marcus listened carefully before speaking. "We spend billions improving mechanical reliability," he said. "But human perception still influences critical decisions. If someone hesitates to question an assumption, safety decreases." The room grew thoughtful. For the first time, bias awareness became connected directly to operational safety metrics rather than public relations. The industry began to understand something powerful. Fairness wasn't separate from performance, it improved it. Months passed. The viral attention faded, replaced by steady institutional changes. Training programs launched quietly across multiple airports. Security staff practiced verification scenarios designed to reduce escalation based on appearance alone. Marcus rarely mentioned the incident again, but one afternoon, while traveling for another conference, he returned unexpectedly to the same private terminal where everything had happened. The space looked identical: polished floors, glass walls, luxury seating, yet the atmosphere felt subtly different. A security officer approached with a professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. May I verify your boarding credentials?" The tone was respectful, neutral, procedural. Marcus handed over his confirmation. The officer checked carefully, nodded, and returned it. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." Boarding begins shortly. No tension, no suspicion, just professionalism. Marcus felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not because he was recognized, but because he wasn't singled out at all. As he waited, the supervisor from months earlier approached slowly. She looked nervous but determined. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever come back," she admitted. Marcus smiled politely. "Air travel makes the world small." She nodded, then took a breath. I wanted you to know, things really changed after that day. Training, procedures, even how we talk to passengers. I think people understand now. Marcus studied her expression. It wasn't defensive anymore. It was reflective. It's good to hear, he said. She hesitated before adding, I've replayed that moment in my mind 100 times. I realized I never actually asked you a question before assuming the answer. Marcus nodded gently. Questions create understanding, he said. Assumptions create distance. She thanked him quietly and walked away. Boarding began soon after. This time, Marcus walked toward the aircraft without interruption. The same hum of jet engines filled the air, but the feeling was different, lighter, calmer. As he settled into his seat, he watched passengers board behind him. Executives, engineers, assistants, travelers from different backgrounds moving toward the same destination. No one stared, no one whispered, just people traveling. The plane lifted into the sky, rising above clouds glowing orange in the evening sunlight. Marcus opened his laptop, returning to simulation models waiting for review. Work continued, as it always did. Yet something had shifted beyond his own experience. One moment of public tension had sparked conversations across an entire industry. Policies had changed, awareness had grown. Small interactions now carried greater intention. Marcus understood that progress rarely arrived dramatically. It moved slowly, carried forward by uncomfortable lessons people chose not to forget. As the aircraft cruised at altitude, he looked out the window again. Thousands of flights crossed the sky at that moment, each relying on systems designed by unseen professionals. Passengers trusted those systems without knowing the names behind them. That anonymity used to bother Marcus early in his career. Now he appreciated it. Because real impact didn't require recognition, it required results. And somewhere, at some airport, another traveler would walk confidently toward a gate without hesitation from staff who once might have doubted them. They would never know why their experience felt smoother. They would never know about a morning confrontation, a crowded terminal, or a speech that forced an industry to reflect. But Marcus would know. He closed his laptop and leaned back as the cabin lights dimmed. Respect, he realized, wasn't proven in moments of power. It was proven in ordinary interactions when no one expected consequences. The plane continued forward through the night sky, steady and quiet, carrying people toward futures shaped not only by technology, but by the gradual decision to see one another more clearly. And for Marcus Reed, that invisible progress measured not in headlines but in changed behavior remained the most powerful destination of all.